Hello. ចាជាបឋមសូមគោរពទៅដល់គណៈចៅក្រមទាំងអស់ជាទីគោរព
The respected panelists, judges, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Well, on this occasion, my name is Morokot from Cambodian Women's Movement Organization. I would like to read the petition of our program. So, we, the Asia Floor Wage Committee, Cambodia, and also on behalf of Cambodian government workers working in the world government initiative, would like to submit our petition on living wage and decent working conditions as fundamental rights, human rights. Please listen to the appeal and also examine this petition of workers and also the issue of deteriorating wages and working conditions in the Cambodian garment industry. The garment brands that buy garment products from Asia need to be responsible for the serious exploitation and the abuse of rights of workers in Asia, especially in Cambodia. The violation that is arising in countries of manufacturing has made workers lose their human dignity and also income in countries in Asia as well as from the industry. So that's why we would like to seek solution to this situation. So petitioners are local, the Asia Floor Wage Committee of Cambodia, made up of 9 organizations of major garment workers federations, workers confederations, and civil society, who is defending the need for living wage to be implemented in the garment industry as a fundamental right to workers. The Asia Floor Wage Committee Cambodia consists of Cambodia Confederation of Trade Unions, CCTU, Cambodian Labor Confederation, CLC, Community Legal Education Center, CLC, Cambodian National Confederation, CNC, Cambodia Women's Movement Organization, CWMO, National Junior Alliance Chamber of Cambodia, NACC, Cambodian Confederation of Unions, CCU, Cambodia Workers Center for Development, CWCD, American Center for International Labor Solidarity, ACILS. Our vision is that workers in Cambodia must enjoy decent work and conditions and live with dignity and freedom. The Asia Floor Wage Alliance was officially established in 2006, and almost 71 organizations from 17 countries across Asia, Europe, and North America are part of this alliance. They are garment industry trade unions, NGOs, consumer groups, research institutes, which are part of this broad network. However, our core leadership comes from trade union movement in the garment industry. We also mobilize the consumers in the north and lobby the garment retailer and big brands via our international partners in the north. At the present time, there are ongoing campaigns that have been started in the producing Asia countries. Preamble: according to International Labor Organization, ILO, wage, employment and wages are central to the world of work. Approximately half of the global labor force works for wage. Living standards and the livelihood of wage earners and families depend on the level of wages, when and how they are adjusted and paid. Wages are a major component of overall consumption and a key factor in the economic performance of countries. The enormous expansion of the labor force participating directly and indirectly in the international exchange of goods and services, and the growing interdependence of low, middle, and high-income countries has squarely placed wages at the center of the debate on globalization. According to Global Wage Report 2008, in 1944, the International Labour Organization ILO adopted the Declaration of Philadelphia as an addition to the ILO's constitution. The declaration articulated key principles. Labor is not a commodity. Freedom of expression and of association are essential to sustain the progress. Poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere, and that all human beings have the right to pursue both their material well-being and their spiritual development in conditions of freedom and dignity, of economic security and equal opportunity. In June 2008, the International Labour Conference adopted an ILO declaration on social justice for a fair globalization based on the principles in the Declaration of Philadelphia. The Declaration on Social Justice supports policies in regard to wages and earnings, hours, and other conditions of work designed to ensure a just share of the fruits of progress to all. The 2008 Declaration recognizes the importance of full employment and the raising of standards of living, a minimum living wage, and the extension of social security measures to provide a basic income to all in need. In other words, social security, a decent wage, and formal and full employment are essential for a minimum living standard. The importance of setting a minimum standard, minimum wage, is signal that not all conditions of work or of life are subject to negotiation or coercion. The significance of setting a living wage is that it makes concrete the idea that work should provide for one's life, that a working person should never, despite the efforts, be unable to support themselves and their families. The Universal Declaration states in Article 23 that everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights has two articles that are related to wage. Article 7 defines remuneration as providing workers at a minimum with, number one, fair wages and equal remuneration for work of equal value without distinction of any kind, in particular women being guaranteed conditions of work not inferior to those enjoyed by men, with equal pay for equal work. Number two, a decent living for themselves and their families in accordance with the provisions of the present covenant. Number 3, safe and healthy working conditions. Safe and healthy working conditions. Number 4, rest, leisure, and reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay, as well as remuneration for public holidays. Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights defines the right of everyone to have an adequate standard of living for himself, herself, and their families, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and through the continuous improvement of living conditions. The state parties shall take appropriate steps to ensure the realization of this right, recognizing to this effect the essential importance of international cooperation based on free consent. Article 11 of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women articulates the right to equal remuneration, including benefits, and to equal treatment in respect of work of equal value, as well as equality of treatment in the evaluation of the quality of work. It prohibits, subject to the imposition of sanctions, dismissal on the ground of pregnancy or of paternity leave, and discrimination in dismissals on the basis of marital status. Unfortunately, the universal body of human rights instruments and standards only imply, rather than assert, a positive right to wage. Based on the ILO's standard on wage, as described above, the Cambodia People's Tribunal, as part of the Asia Flow Wage campaign, seeks to assert a right to minimum living wage. The relationship of wage to survival raises questions about the consequences of denial of wages. The growing gap between the rich and the poor, and the increasing impoverishment of the majority of the working poor in Asia give rise to great economic inequality. Denial of a minimum living wage is not only a grave injustice that perpetuates social, political, and economic inequalities, but jeopardizes the entire global economic well-being, where the productive forces are deprived of the means of basic survival and of opportunities for development. Denial of a minimum living wage as a right directly impacts the realization of survival and universal human rights as illustrated herein. The right to life. The insecurities that arise when workers are paid less than minimum wage make it impossible to actually satisfy the right to life, as it denies access to medical care in case of illness or accidents. It prevents the household from purchasing necessary nutritious food on a day-to-day basis. It removes the means to provide education to children towards improving their living standards. It means outright starvation for those without access to emergency assistance and relief goods in times of calamities or natural or man-made disasters. The right to equal opportunity, the global gender division of work, where female-dominated industries are characterized by lower than minimum wages and exploitative practices, sustains the global manufacturing industry and is central to their profit-driven survival. Thus, violating the right to equal opportunity and the right to minimum wage is the norm for those industries which seek to be so-called globally competitive. The right to equal protection under the law, propelled by globalization, countries have created legal and political environments where it will be more difficult to petition the government to protect the right to minimum wage. Workers that have unionized and waged struggles on wage issues find that they lack the necessary protection against arbitrary dismissals or terminations. Many companies simply do not allow the formation and registration of unions. The right to decent working hours. As a result of both challenging industry relations and the need to satisfy their more basic necessities, garment workers are compelled to work overtime hours when their wages are below minimum wage. This subliminal form of coercion may be concealed, but its consequences clearly are visible in the daily struggles of workers who have succumbed to lengthy working hours to earn that scant extra revenue for survival. In light of such, the Asia Floor Wage Alliance grasps the need to establish a minimum living wage as a means to impede forced labor and to ensure a liberating, not limiting society. The right to a standard of living adequate for himself and his family without a decent minimum living wage. By no means are workers able to meet their basic needs of food, shelter, or clothing. Based on pragmatic accounts of what is to be considered as decent, the Asia Floor Wage Alliance would ensure that their wages can satisfy such basic necessities. The proliferation of various public and private institutions, the increasing levels of mediation, and the growing complexity of the global economic structure have made accountability for the denial of wage difficult and elusive. In order to make right to minimum living wage justiciable, both public and private institutions would need to be identified and mechanisms implemented for the delivery of this right. The Cambodian garment industry worker situation. Introduction. The garment industry continues to be the largest contributor of exports to Cambodia's economy. This represents approximately 90% of total export value and employs more than 300,000 workers. The garment sector has successfully weathered the financial crisis and has since experienced steady growth in production as well as in the number of factories operating within the nation. However, whilst production has succeeded pre-crisis levels, employment is yet to recover to the same extent and remains around 40,000 below its peak figure. This has placed increased pressure on workers who have become increasingly exposed to a precarious state of affairs, as highlighted below. Concerns: the prevalence of employers utilizing fixed duration contracts has been a disturbing phenomenon since 2005 and now characterizes the relationships of the vast majority of those employed within the sector. Prior to this period, most government sector workers were employed under unspecified duration contracts, which conferred a greater access to rights such as maternity and indemnity pay, with the accumulation of seniority and limited the circumstances under which lawful termination could take place. Fixed duration contracts were originally intended to be used for work that was of a temporary nature, such as seasonal projects, or to meet spikes in demand. Government factories, by contrast, are long-term ventures, but have deployed FDCs due to their ability to be continuously renewed and hence preventing the accretion of benefits by the employees and any expense that might confer on the employer. Furthermore, as the employer is able to choose whether the contract should be renewed after its expiry, the ease of terminating employment relationships is greatly enhanced under FDCs. In practice, this has resulted in coercing individuals into overtime, preventing unionization membership, or seeking enjoyment of benefits. Another issue of concern currently facing government factories and their workers has been mass fainting. In 2011 alone, the Free Trade Union has reported some 2,300 workers fainting in 5 Cambodian factories, whilst currently no worker has suffered serious injuries because of fainting. It remains a worrying trend which is detrimental to both the public image and efficiency of Cambodian factories. Investigations and company statements have varied in their conclusions on contributing factors, but many have highlighted physiological causes such as low blood sugar, malnutrition, dehydration, food poisoning, and overexertion. In recognition of this, Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen instigated a sector-wide pay rise of $5 to be initiated from January 2012, in the hope that this would alleviate some of these causes. Unfortunately, unionization, the typical means of redressing imbalance in workers' rights, is also facing an uncertain future. This is a result of the attempts of the Ministry of Labor and Vocational Training to draft a law on trade unions, which, whilst a legitimate notion in itself, has in fact undermined the right for promotion and participation in unions and associations, whilst successive drafts of the law have seemingly curtailed several worrisome inclusions, including the ability to bring about criminal charges for union wrongdoings. Many articles remain problematic. The overwhelming concern is that the draft law's character is procedurally excessive and unclear, thereby creating complex legal requirements for registration and activities. Not only do these accompaniments stand as an obstacle to the ability of workers to effectively exercise their rights, but they also create the means for arbitrary interventions. For example, if requirements are not followed correctly, unions risk postponement or suspicion of their certifications, cancellation of status as a legal entity, and even for enforced total structural dissolution. Petition. The petitioner presents to the People's Tribunal on minimum living wage as a fundamental right of Cambodian garment workers the following testimonies. Number 1, one case study from workers and women workers in the garment industry in Cambodia. Number 2, one case study of workers producing for one brand. Number 3, one case study of workers producing for a second brand. Number 4, one case study from a trade unionist taking up a collective case that led to nationwide strikes. Number 5, expert testimony on Cambodia's economic conditions in its garment industry. Number 6, stakeholder presentation on government perspective. Number 7, expert testimony on Cambodia labor law pertaining to garment industry. Number 8, stakeholder presentation from manufacturer. Number 9, stakeholder presentation from brand 1, H&M. Number 10, stakeholder presentation from brand 2, GAP Gap. Number 11, stakeholder presentation from brand 3, PHNOM Puma. Number 12, stakeholder presentation from brand 4, Adidas. Number 13, expert testimony from Clean Clothes Campaign, Sweden. The Fair Trade Center's view on H&M's purchasing practices, and the brand's possibility of supporting LW. Number 14, expert testimony on Asia floor wage and retail price. Number 15, expert testimony presentation on the logic and feasibility of Asia floor wage. A. The petitioner, through the people's advocates, argues that there is a deficit in wages paid to the women workers in the garment sector in Cambodia, that the wages paid to the workers, although a minimum wage falls far below a living wage standard that should provide adequate wages for basic food, clothing and accommodation, health, fuel and transport, education and communication, and other expenses such as contribution to family subscriptions such as to trade unions, care for children and parents, and other social functions. B. Petitioner argues that Cambodia is a party to international standards, including core conventions of ILO, and has enacted laws and policies in line with these international standards. However, there are problems with the implementation of and compliance with the international standards and national laws and policies, with lacunas that allow employers to circumvent the law. C. The petition argues that workers in the garment industry receive poverty wages, in that over and above receive wages far below a living wage, work excessive hours, subject to unpaid overtime, and to poor and stressful working conditions. In addition, there is lack of access to social protection, especially in informal employment, a lack of protection for women workers, especially in relation to health and safety, sexual harassment, maternity and reproductive health, and childcare. D. The petition confirms that garment workers are mostly women who are migrants, mothers, caregivers, young, and have a double burden in society because they are both homemakers and economic providers. This deficit denies their dreams for education, for professional development, for marriage, to have children, to care for their parents, to provide for their families, to build their own homes. E. The petitioner argues that this wage regime removes the capacity of women garment workers to extricate themselves from the cycle of poverty, elevate the economic and political status, and maintain their dignity and self-respect. F. The petitioner will argue that it is the loss of living wage earnings for workers that correspond to a benefit in shrewd profits for the garment industry of today, who have profited shrewdly from outsourcing production to low-wage countries. In this sense, we will show in evidence gathered from the global supply chain and on working and living conditions that fall short of the recent labor standards. G. The petitioner argues that it is possible to provide a living wage and propose the Asia floor wage as a minimum living wage option that minimally meets the conditions for decent labor standards. Asia floor wage alliance can be a solution to raising the wages of workers from the lowest of the industry, increasing their bargaining power throughout the supply chain, in attenuating women's unequal bargaining power, in addressing gender wage gaps, and in improving workers' well-being. The People's Tribunal is asked to examine the evidence and find for the petitioner. Number 1, is there a deficit in decent labor standards in Cambodia's garment industry? Number 2, determine the magnitude of workers, especially women workers, in the garment global supply chain, working and living in conditions that fall far short of decent labor standards. Number 3, is there a wage deficit for basic living standards? Number 4, what are the causes of the wage deficit? Who are responsible? Number 5, Can Asia Floor Wage Alliance address this wage deficit? Number 6. What are the criteria for a wage that is defined as a human right? Prayer. It is our prayer, therefore, to the respectful panel of the tribunal to find that there are wage deficits in the Cambodian garment industry, that these deficits violate human rights and labor standards, and that living wage is a redress to these violations if enacted and implemented, and adequate mechanisms in place. It is our prayer that the respectful panel of the tribunal find that garment industry and trade unions have respective duties and responsibilities towards the fulfillment of workers' living wage.
ចាសូមអរគុណចា